What if love didn't come with fireworks, but with silence? With a quiet knock on the door, a promise made decades ago, and a man who never expected to fall. If you're someone who believes the softest stories often leave the deepest mark, like this video and subscribe for more, because sometimes the quietest beginnings lead to the most unforgettable endings. I used to think I'd marry for love, but love had no place at the Whitmore estate, especially not on the night I was dressed in ivory silk, standing beneath a chandelier so grand it swallowed the ceiling. The air smelled like cedarwood and power. I stood still while strangers toasted to a future I hadn't chosen. I was 23, a tailor's daughter with no title, no money, and too much pride to cry in front of them. And tonight, I was to become the fiancé of Ethan Whitmore, CEO of Whitmore Holdings, heir to a fortune that could swallow my family whole. They said I was lucky, that I should be grateful, that it was a rescue. But no one asked me if I wanted saving. The engagement dinner was quiet, too quiet, not warm, not festive. It was a transaction dressed in crystalware and gold napkin rings. Ethan sat at the end of the table, tall, silent, as unreadable as stone. His dark suit was perfect, his posture military. He glanced at me only once all evening, with the look of a man assessing a contract. I didn't know him, and I doubted he wanted to know me. The truth? I barely knew myself anymore. The girl I used to be, who laughed barefoot on the porch, who stitched ribbons into her mother's hair while she sang old folk songs. She hadn't existed since the night we got the call about my father's debt. That debt had become mine the moment I signed the engagement papers. Later that night, I returned to my assigned room in the guest wing. Everything smelled expensive. Lavender-laced linen, aged wood polish, old money. I sat down to take off my earrings and saw something unexpected on the vanity, a small wooden box. I hadn't brought it. It was old, hand-carved, worn at the corners. I recognized it instantly. My mother's. My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside was a folded letter, yellowed at the edges. Her handwriting. I would have known it anywhere. My dearest Elena, if you're reading this, then I suppose the day has come. The day we both feared and prayed would never arrive. There was a promise I once made, a sacred one, to Eleanor Whitmore, long before either of us became mothers. A bond of friendship and sacrifice. When she saved our family from ruin, she asked only one thing in return, that if ever her grandson stood alone in this world, you would stand beside him. Not for money, for honor. This is not a transaction. This is a passing of trust. And I believe you are strong enough to carry it, even when the world doesn't feel kind. Love, always, Mama. I couldn't breathe for a long while. The engagement hadn't been just about saving my father from his debts. It hadn't been about power plays or corporate games. It was something older, deeper. A debt of gratitude buried in silence. I sat by the window that night, watching snow fall over the garden statues. The cold seeped in through the glass, but I didn't move. I just held the letter to my chest, trying to reconcile everything I felt. I was angry that no one had told me the truth, that I'd been dragged into this without consent, but I was also moved. Because for the first time, I didn't feel like I was being sold. I felt like I was being entrusted, and it terrified me. I saw Ethan again the next morning. He was in the library, standing by a wall of books taller than my childhood home. He wore the same stoic face, but something about him felt unfinished, like a painting that hadn't been signed. He looked up when I entered. Our eyes met for barely a second, but it was long enough for me to wonder, did he know? Did he understand that we weren't just engaged by obligation, but by a thread woven decades before either of us could speak? I didn't ask. And he didn't speak. Instead, I nodded politely and left the room. That night, as I tucked my mother into bed at the guest house, I smoothed the blanket over her frail frame. Her illness had taken more than her strength. It had taken her song. But she smiled when I touched her hand. And in that smile, I found a memory. A 6-year-old girl, sitting at the edge of the kitchen table, listening to her mother hum a lullaby while folding dough. The smell of cinnamon, the warmth of the stove, the sound of love, without condition. I returned to my room and lit a single candle on the nightstand. Its flame flickered, dancing shadows across the wooden panels. I held the letter again. This wasn't love, not yet, but maybe love didn't always come first. Maybe sometimes honor came first, and love learned to grow in its light. The morning after the engagement dinner, I woke to silence. Not peace. Silence. The kind that settles like dust in corners. The kind that makes you hold your breath without meaning to. I moved quietly, not because anyone told me to, but because this house, the Whitmore estate, demanded it. Every step on the polished floor echoed like a decision. Every hallway seemed to ask, "Do you belong here?" And the truth was, I didn't know. Ethan wasn't at breakfast. They said he had a meeting in the city. I didn't believe them. Not because they were lying, but because Ethan Whitmore didn't need an excuse to avoid me. He simply would, with the precision of a man who made it a habit to shut doors gently and never reopen them. I took my tea alone on the veranda, where the winter sunlight couldn't quite reach my skin. The garden beyond the glass had gone bare, shrubs shivering under a thin layer of frost. I wondered if this was what my marriage would feel like. Beautiful on the outside, cold on the inside. Later that day, I visited my mother. She was resting. In the guest house the Whitmores had quietly arranged for her recovery. Her nurse said the new medication was helping, but I could still see the tiredness in her eyes, the way she flinched at sudden movement. But when I entered the room, she smiled. Always that smile. Soft. Knowing. Like she could still see me at 5 years old, clutching fabric scraps and asking for stories. I sat on the bed and brought her the scarf I had stitched by hand the week before. Lavender cotton, edges hemmed with care. She touched it with her fingertips. "It's lovely," she whispered. "You always had gentle hands." I swallowed the lump in my throat. I hadn't felt gentle lately. "Mama," I said, after a pause, "did you ever feel like you were living someone else's life?" She looked at me then, with eyes that had held years of sacrifice. "Every day, until I made it mine." That night, something shifted. I couldn't sleep, so I wandered the halls. The estate was dimly lit, as if even the lamps knew to be quiet after 10. I ended up near the study. The door was cracked open. I heard voices. I shouldn't have stopped. But I did. "We've moved Mrs. Lancaster to the specialist's care, as requested," a male voice said. "And no, sir, she doesn't know who authorized it. The payments are anonymous, as instructed." Ethan's voice answered, low and tired. "Keep it that way." I froze. Mrs. Lancaster. My mother. I stepped back, away from the light. My heart hammering. He had done it. Quietly, carefully, without telling a soul. He had paid for the cardiologist, the transport, the treatment. He had done for her what I didn't dare ask, and he hadn't even wanted me to know. I don't remember falling asleep, only that I woke the next morning with his name stuck somewhere between my throat and my chest. I found him later that day, by the old piano in the West Wing. He wasn't playing, just standing there, one hand resting on the wood, like he was listening to a song no one else could hear. "Thank you," I said softly. He didn't turn. "For what?" "For what you did for my mother." Still no movement. She deserved better than a business arrangement. So do you. I took a step closer. Then why treat me like a transaction? That made him turn. His eyes were darker in the eye. Low light. Not cold. Not cruel. Just heavy. Because if I don't, he said, I might forget that this wasn't supposed to be personal. And then he walked past me, without waiting for a reply. That night, I couldn't stop thinking about what he said. This wasn't supposed to be personal. But wasn't it already? The way he spoke to no one but noticed everything. The way he avoided me but protected my mother. The way he stood by the piano, silent and unsure, like a man trying to remember what softness felt like. Maybe this wasn't love yet, but it was no longer indifference either. As I returned to my room, I passed a mirror in the hallway. For the first time in weeks, I stopped and looked, not at the dress, not at the tired eyes, but at the quiet girl behind them, and I whispered, just to myself, whatever this becomes, I want to choose it. It started with a cup of tea, a simple thing. A ritual I had inherited from my mother long before I understood what it meant to find comfort in something warm between your hands. That morning, the estate kitchen was unusually quiet. I had woken before the staff and crept in barefoot, craving a sense of normalcy, something that belonged to me. I reached for the old tin of chamomile tea my mother kept on her shelf back home. It had been packed among our things, dented from years of use. I smiled as I opened it, expecting dried petals and that familiar scent of lemon balm. Instead, I found a folded envelope tucked between the tea bags. My name was on the front, in her handwriting. A second letter. I read it on the cold stone floor, legs crossed like a child, elbows on my knees. Elena. If you're reading this, then your father never found the strength to tell you, and maybe I can't blame him. Regret is a heavy thing, and your father has carried his in silence longer than anyone should. Years ago, when you were still in school, your father nearly lost everything. The shop, our house, even the roof over, your little brother's head. It wasn't gambling like some whispered. It wasn't foolishness. It was trust, given to the wrong man. A cousin, a partner, someone he believed in. And when it all fell apart, it was Ethan Whitmore's grandmother who stepped in. Not with money, with faith. Ethan came to visit me after her funeral. He was just 20. He asked me, looked me in the eye, and said, if one day Elena ever needs me, I'll come. No questions. I never forgot that look. It wasn't business. It was a boy trying to be better than the legacy he'd inherited. So if he seems distant now, cold or sharp, remember that he didn't walk into your life a stranger. He walked in already trying to keep a promise. My chest ached in a way I didn't expect. Not because I felt lied to, but because for the first time, I saw Ethan not as the man across from me at a sterile dinner table, but as a boy who had once stood in our modest living room, making promises he had no reason to keep. A boy who had remembered. I found him in the greenhouse behind the estate that afternoon. The glass panes were fogged, breath clinging to the air. He was standing near the violets, gloves on, sleeves rolled up. Something about the way he knelt to trim a stem made my throat tighten. He wasn't performing. He didn't know I was there. When I stepped inside, he looked up. Not startled, just expectant, like he'd known I would come. You're not avoiding me today, I said. No, he replied. Not today. I held out the letter. His eyes landed on it before meeting mine again. You knew, I said. You remembered. He took a breath. Slow. Careful. I was 20, and I had no power. But I remembered how your mother looked when she opened the door. Tired. Kind, strong in a way no man ever taught me to be. I stepped closer, hands shaking a little. Why didn't you tell me? Because I didn't want you to feel obligated. I almost laughed, bitter and small. Obligated. I've felt nothing but obligation since the day I put on that ring. Exactly, he said, voice low. I didn't want to add my guilt to your chain. There was silence. Not tense, just full. Like the air needed room to hold what wasn't being said. I thought you didn't care, I whispered, and I thought if I did, I'd ruin you. He said it without looking at me, fingers grazing a violet petal with too much gentleness for someone known to crush boardrooms. Then he turned. I never stopped remembering you, not once. But remembering isn't the same as deserving. Something cracked open in me. Not anger. Not even grief. Just a soft, aching recognition of someone trying, quietly, desperately, not to fail where everyone else had. I reached for his hand. He flinched. Not away. Just surprised. I'm not asking you to deserve me, I said. I'm asking you to be honest with me, that's all. He nodded. No words, but his fingers tightened around mine, and for the first time, I didn't feel like we were two people being pushed together by history. We were two people choosing to stay. That night, I sat by my mother's bed again. She was asleep, hand curled beneath her chin like she used to when I was little. I held the letter close, then folded it and placed it back into the tea tin. Not for forgetting, for safekeeping. Because some truths didn't need to be spoken every day. They just needed to be held. It was the way my father avoided my eyes that told me something was wrong. He'd come to the estate that morning, escorted by a Whitmore driver, wearing the same overwashed blazer he'd worn to my high school recital. His hands trembled as he poured himself tea, though he pretended it was just the chill outside. The Arlington property, he said without looking up. They're asking for signatures, to transfer ownership. I blinked. What? That land's still in our name. Not anymore. Not technically. We used it as collateral when... He stopped. Regret folded into the creases of his face. When the family was falling apart and I had no one else to turn to. I didn't raise my voice. I just felt a slow burn begin behind my ribs. So you're telling me that the last thing we had, the land where Mama grew up, belongs to them now? Unless we can pay back what we owe by the end of the quarter. He laughed dryly. Which we can't. That evening, I found Ethan in his office. The door was open, the room dimly lit. He sat with his back to me, staring at nothing. You knew, I said quietly. He didn't answer right away, just breathed in, then out. Yes. And you didn't think I deserved to know? Turned to face me. I thought it would only hurt you. I've been trying to carry as much of it as I can. That's not your job. It became my job, he said. The moment they told me you'd be the one paying for your family's mistakes. The words hit harder than I wanted them to. Not because he was wrong. Because he wasn't. 2 hours later, I was standing in the study across from one of the Whitmore board attorneys. A document sat between us, sleek, cold, designed to make losing your family land feel like a routine formality. I didn't blink. Give me the pen, I said. Elena, Ethan's voice was calm but low. Warning. This isn't your burden. It's my family, I said. It is my burden. I reached for the pen. He stepped in front of me. Then let me take it with you. His voice didn't rise. It didn't beg. It just asked. And for once, I heard something in it that sounded like fear. Fear of losing not just control, but losing me. He turned to the attorney. Tear it up. Sir? All of it. The contracts, the liens. I'll clear the debt myself. The man's eyes widened. That would mean relinquishing your seat on the board and your voting rights. I know what it means. Silence filled the room like fog. You'd walk away from your inheritance? I asked, stunned. Ethan didn't look at me. It's not an inheritance if it costs you everything worth keeping. Later that night, I sat with my mother in the kitchen of the guest house. She was stronger now, sitting up, stirring tea, humming faintly. The warmth of the stove cast shadows across her cheekbones. Her hands, once too weak to lift a spoon, moved with slow grace. He stood up for you today, she said, without me telling her anything. I could feel it. He gave up the board, the land, everything his family's been building. She looked at me, eyes still as sharp as they were the day I was born. Then he's not your family's enemy anymore. He's becoming your future. A few days passed. The phone rang late one afternoon. My father answered in the hall, his voice tense, almost offensive. A moment later, he knocked on my door. There's someone downstairs asking for you. Who? Your mother's sister, Claire. I hadn't seen my aunt in nearly a decade. She had left when I was 14, after a bitter falling out no one dared explain. Rumor said she'd disappeared with someone else's money. Others said she'd simply stopped caring. But now she stood in the entryway of the estate, hair grayer, back straighter than I remembered. She looked at me and smiled, tight-lipped, guarded. You look like your mother, she said. Why are you here? Because I owed her, and I never paid that debt. But I can now. She handed me a manila envelope. Inside, documents, financial statements. Proof that years ago, she had been the one to sell out our family land, to the Whitmores, without telling anyone, but also a signed declaration. She was reversing the deed, giving the land back. Because he deserves it, she said, nodding, toward the hall Ethan had just walked through. And so do you. That night I made tea in the kitchen, real tea, with honey and lemon and steam curling in the air. Ethan stepped in as I poured the water. I didn't know you could make it the right way, he teased. That's because you've only seen me in rooms where I don't belong, I said. He didn't smile. He just stepped closer and placed a hand on the small of my back. You belong here, he said. You just forgot. The house was smaller. That's what I noticed first. After the grand echo of Arlington's stone halls and polished silence, this place, Ethan's grandmother's old cottage, felt almost too quiet, as if it were holding its breath, waiting for someone to speak first. The kitchen was cramped, the floor creaked, the wallpaper peeled a little in the corners, but there was a fire already lit in the hearth, and the windows let in the kind of light you don't get in estates. Soft, golden, real. I thought we'd start over here, Ethan said, setting my mother's suitcase gently by the front room. He didn't mean just geographically, and I didn't ask him to explain. The first few days were filled with silence, not uncomfortable, but full of things we weren't quite ready to say out loud. So we spoke through action. I unpacked the kitchen. He repaired the loose shutters, made tea in the late afternoons. He stacked firewood at dusk. We were two people who had been taught not to need anyone. And now, we were learning, awkwardly, carefully, how to need each other. I remember the moment I realized things were changing. It was late. I had fallen asleep on the couch, an open book on my chest. The fire had gone low. I woke up to Ethan, gently lifting the blanket up over me, thinking I was still asleep. He stood for a moment, just watching. Then, almost inaudibly, he whispered, "Don't leave." And he didn't mean the couch. My mother was improving slowly. The country air, the new medication, the way Ethan kept her fridge stocked with the fruit she liked but never asked for. It all made a difference. One morning, I found him on his knees in the garden planting lavender. "It was her favorite," he said, wiping dirt from his hands. "You remember?" "I remember everything," he said, not looking up. "Even the little things, especially the little things. That night I made dinner, not with caterers or staff or silver dishes. Just my hands, a little olive oil, a recipe I hadn't used. Since Mama last stood beside me in the kitchen, Ethan watched me the whole time, but didn't interrupt. When I turned to set the table, I caught him smiling. A small smile. The kind that doesn't ask for attention but means something anyway. "What?" I asked. "Nothing," he said. "Just, you look different when you cook. Like yourself." After dinner, we sat on the porch with our mugs. Mine warm with chamomile, his dark with black coffee. The wind was low. The trees whispered overhead. For the first time in what felt like years, I wasn't thinking about debt or obligation or legacy. I was thinking about how quiet his breathing was, how close his shoulder was to mine, how still the world could be when no one was pretending. "You built all of this," I said softly. "I built it for her," he replied, "but you're living in it with me." He nodded once. That's what I was hoping for. There was no grand confession, no sudden kiss in the rain, just the kind of silence that speaks volumes. Later that evening, I walked into the room and found a small frame resting on the bedside table. Inside, a photo of my mother, young and bright-eyed, standing in a field of lavender. I turned to Ethan. "Where did you find this?" "She gave it to me. Years ago. Said if I ever forgot what mattered, I should look at it." He paused. "I think I was always meant to end up here, with me, with someone who reminded me what family actually means." When I went to bed that night, he didn't follow me. Not yet. But he stood at the door for a moment, hand on the frame. "If you ever feel like staying," he said. "There's no contract this time. No obligation. Just me." And he left the door open when he walked away. It started with the rain. A slow, steady patter against the roof. Not a storm. Not loud. Just enough to remind me we were far from the world we used to know. I was in the kitchen, drying dishes. Ethan was in the doorway. One shoulder leaned against the frame, arms crossed, watching. He didn't say anything. He just stayed. "You always watch me like that," I said without turning. "Like what?" "Like you're not sure if I'm really here." He was silent for a moment. "Because I'm not," he finally said. "Because part of me still thinks I don't get to have this." I dried the last plate and set it down. "You do," I said. "But you have to stop standing in doorways." He took a step forward. "Just one." "You sure?" "I wouldn't still be here if I wasn't." The lights were low in the bedroom, just the golden wash of the hallway lamp slipping in through the crack in the door. I sat on the edge of the bed, hands resting on my lap, unsure who would move first. Ethan stood a few feet away, every part of him as tense as I felt. "I've never," I began. He looked at me, not surprised, just soft. "I know." He crossed the room slowly and knelt in front of me. "Elena," he said, voice barely above a whisper. "I'm not here to take anything. Not your past. Not your body. Not your trust. Unless you hand it to me." I looked down at his hands, open, unmoving, and I placed mine in them. We undressed without speaking, not out of shame, but out of something holier. Reverent. His hands trembled. slightly when he touched the hem of my nightgown. He looked up once, eyes asking the question he didn't say aloud. I nodded. The fabric slid off my shoulders, pooling at my waist before I stepped out of it entirely. His shirt followed, then the rest, until there was nothing between us but breath. He kissed me. Not as a claim, not as conquest, but like someone tasting spring water for the first time after a long drought. His hands found the small of my back. Mine found the curve of his shoulder. And when he laid me down, it was like folding into a space that had always been waiting. The first time he entered me, I gasped. It wasn't pain, not really, just newness, stretching, a surrender I'd never allowed myself before. He stopped, instantly. Too much? He asked, voice rough but careful. No, I whispered, pulling him closer. Don't stop. His forehead pressed to mine as we found a rhythm. Slow, patient, bodies learning one another in the dark. There was no rush, no need to perform, just the steady build of something real, something rooted. When he whispered my name, it wasn't lust. It was reverence. When I clung to him, it wasn't fear. It was finally letting go. I felt the wave come slowly, rising from deep inside. It wasn't just physical. It was emotional, spiritual, something ancient and new at once. I cried out as I came, not with volume, but with clarity, as if something that had been locked in me for years had finally opened. He followed not long after, burying his face in my neck, letting out a sound I'll never forget, a sound of release, of relief, of belonging. We stayed like that for a long time, skin to skin, hearts still racing. Then he shifted, pulling me into his chest, wrapping the blanket around us. I've never made love like that, he murmured into my hair. Like what? Like I wanted it to never end. The rain was still falling outside, steady and soft. I listened to it as I rested my head on his chest, counting the beats of his heart, feeling safer than I'd ever felt in my life. He traced slow circles on my back with his fingers. You're not the girl I was supposed to marry, he said quietly. You're the woman I was supposed to find. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. Because in that moment, wrapped in warmth and quiet, I knew something that no contract or promise could capture. We hadn't just made love. We had claimed a new beginning. Together. I woke to the scent of coffee and old pine. Ethan was already up. I found him standing on the porch, barefoot, coffee mug in hand, eyes on the gray line where sky met forest. He looked like someone bracing for news. Or a goodbye. You're thinking too loud, I said softly, wrapping a sweater around myself. He turned, barely smiling. They called this morning, he said. From the board. Let me guess. They want you back. He nodded once. They say the company's in trouble. Bad investments. Stockholders panicking. They want me to fix it. I leaned against the porch post, arms folded. And what did you say? That I'd think about it. I hated how much that hurt. Because it was reasonable. It was responsible. It was expected. And I wasn't sure I could ask him to stay. The rest of the day passed like something borrowed. We moved around each other carefully, like dancers out of rhythm. I baked. He fixed a broken window latch. We touched shoulders in the hallway and didn't linger. That night, I found him in the guest room, his old suitcase open, half-packed. Are you going? I asked from the doorway. He didn't answer at first, just stared down at the shirts he hadn't worn in months. I used to think walking away meant weakness, he said. Now I wonder if going back is worse. Then why are you even considering it? He turned to face me. Because it's what I was raised for. To fix, to lead, to hold things together even when they're rotting underneath. And what about now? I asked. Is this... I gestured between us. Rotting? No, he said. This is the first thing that's grown. But maybe that's exactly why I have to leave. To protect it. I walked toward him, slowly. You think I want you to leave to be noble? No, he said. I think you deserve someone who doesn't run from his name. I don't care about your name, Ethan. I care about your choice. We stood close enough to feel each other breathe. So choose, I whispered. Not for your legacy, not for your title. Choose for you. And if you can't choose us, say it now. He didn't answer. Not that night. The next morning, I woke to find his suitcase gone. So was he. The silence in the cottage was different this time. Not empty, not tragic, just suspended, like something waiting. 2 days passed. My mother noticed first. You've been staring at that window for an hour, Lena. I'm fine. She gave me that mother look. The one that sees what you're hiding even when you think you've buried it deep. He'll come back if he's the man I think he is. And if he's not? She smiled gently. Then you still have a life, and your worth never depended on his presence. That afternoon, I walked through the lavender garden. The first buds had started to open, pale violet, fragile. I knelt and traced the edge of a leaf with one fingertip. There was something taped to the wooden stake holding the garden sign in place. A letter, folded, handwritten. I opened it with careful fingers. Elena, if you're reading, this, it means I left. But not in the way you feared. I went to the city. I looked into their eyes and told them no. Not unless they rebuild it clean. Not unless they stop using my name like a weapon. Then I gave them my resignation. For good. They asked me what I wanted instead. I told them I already had it. I'll be home before dinner. Make that tea you pretend not to love, but always finish. E. Came back at sundown. No speeches, no dramatics, just a quiet knock on the door. When I opened it, he looked at me like he hadn't blinked since he left. I chose, he said. I let him in. And this time, he didn't stop at the door. The lavender bloomed early that year. By the time June arrived, the fields behind the cottage glowed with soft purple, humming with bees and the quiet rustle of summer. I stood at the kitchen window, dish towel in hand, watching Ethan as he moved between rows, sleeves rolled to his elbows, brushing pollen from the blossoms like he was touching memory itself. It had been 3 months since he came home for good. No fanfare, no announcements, no briefcase or boardroom. Just him. Boots dusty, heart open, and suitcase tucked under the stairs like it had never existed. Our days took shape slowly, like bread rising under a clean towel. Mornings of shared coffee, afternoons fixing the screen door, evenings with music playing low from a dusty record player and my mother humming along from her chair by the window. Ethan stopped trying to explain the choice he made. I stopped trying to ask for reasons. We simply stayed. On the first Saturday of summer, the town held a small fair in the center square. Not grand, just local, folding tables with baked goods, hand-sewn pot holders, second-hand books, and jars of peach preserves glinting in the sun. Ethan offered to carry the box of lemon tarts I baked. I teased him for how carefully he balanced it, like a surgeon holding glass. I dropped a pie once when I was a kid, he said, mock-serious. What happened? My grandmother made me write a 3-page apology to the woman who baked it, in cursive. I laughed so hard I nearly dropped one myself. At the fair, people greeted us like we had always belonged. My mother sat under a wide umbrella with a straw hat shading her eyes, accepting compliments with grace and quiet pride. She looked 10 years younger, and in some small way, I knew Ethan was part of that. Later, as the sun dipped lower, we found a bench near the edge of the field. The light cast a soft gold over everything, over his face, over the curls at my neck, over the way our hands found each other naturally now, without hesitation. "You're quiet," he said. "Just watching," I replied, trying to remember. This exact feeling, this exact light, this moment before it disappears. He turned to me. "Then let's make more like it. So if we forget this one, we have 1,000 others to choose from." That night, I found a note on my pillow, not in an envelope. Just folded once, simple. "You once told me not to stand in doorways. I want you to know. I'm in. Not just the house, not just this season of peace. In you. In this life. In every version of tomorrow we can build." EI held it to my chest before I slid it into the top drawer of my nightstand, next to my mother's letter. One promise answering another. When I crawled into bed, Ethan was already there, one arm folded behind his head, the other resting gently on the blanket between us. I laid my head on his chest. "What are you thinking?" he asked. "That I don't want this to end." "It won't," he said, then turned to face me. "Unless you walk away." "I'm not going anywhere," I whispered. We kissed, slow and deep, like a language we had finally learned fluently. There was no rush, no urgency, just the quiet knowing that our bodies had become familiar, cherished. When he moved over me, it wasn't possession. It was promise. When we came together, it was soft and full, the kind of union that asks nothing but gives everything. After we lay tangled in sweat-dampened sheets, skin against skin, the window cracked open to let in the sounds of night. Crickets. Wind. The distant call of an owl. "I used to think power meant being needed," Ethan murmured. "And now? Now I think power is knowing you'd stay even if you didn't need me." "I would," I said. "Stay." And I meant it. A week later, we hosted a gathering for neighbors and friends, small, warm, the kind that smelled of grilled corn and laughter. Ethan stood at the grill, apron tied haphazardly, flipping burgers with an expression of complete concentration. Mother sat with a lemonade in hand, telling stories to a pair of children who listened with wide eyes. I walked through the garden with a basket full of herbs, the scent of rosemary clinging to my fingers. It wasn't fancy. It wasn't a legacy. But it was home. And it was ours. That night, after the guests had gone and the lanterns had gone out, Ethan and I sat on the porch steps. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. My heart stopped, then started again. "Don't worry," he said. "There's no ring in here." I blinked. He opened the box. Inside was a single silver key. "To what?" I asked. He smiled. "To whatever you want to build next." I leaned into him, and together we looked out over the fields. The lavender glowed under the moonlight, and I knew, whatever came after, we would build it side by side. If this story touched something quiet in you, even just a little, feel free to like the video. And if you'd like to hear more stories like this, soft and real and worth staying for, don't forget to subscribe and tap the bell. One day, another story might find you, right when you need it most. Thank you for listening. See you next time.